Good morning, everybody. We'll be starting the ceremony in about 5 minutes. Thanks.
So we just stand here during the proceedings.
When you announce it, you come. Honored guests, students, staff, and parents, thank you for joining us and welcome to our Remembrance ceremony.
We are your MCs for this morning's ceremony. I am Jacqueline Prowse.
And I am Cameron Burr.
We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on traditional lands referred to as Treaty 6 territory, and that Facey Community High School and all the people here are beneficiaries of this peace and friendship treaty. Treaty 6 encompasses the traditional territories of numerous Western Canadian First Nations, including Cree, Dene, Stoney Nakoda Sioux, Saulteaux, and Ojibwe. Facey Community High School is dedicated to ensuring that the spirit of Treaty 6 is honored and respected.
We would now like to recognize the following dignitaries who are attending our very solemn ceremony this morning. Elk Island Public Schools Board Chair, Mrs. Trina Boymuk, Facey Community High School Principal, Mr. Paul Pallister, Facey Community High School Assistant Principal, Mrs. Trudy Williamson, Sher Park Deputy Mayor Dave Anderson, Royal Canadian Mounted Police Constable Tara Lisson, and Facey Community High School Student Representative Nadia Crush.
At this time, we will now hear the poem, Why Wear a Poppy, which will be read by Avery Shepherd.
Please wear a poppy, the lady said, and held one forth, but I shook my head. Then I stopped and watched as she offered them there, and her face was old and lined with care. But beneath the scars the years had made, there remained a smile that refused to fade. A boy came whistling down the street, bouncing along on carefree feet. His smile was full of joy and fun. Lady, said he, may I have one? When she pinned it on, he turned to say, why do we wear a poppy today? The lady smiled in her wistful way and answered, this is Remembrance Day. And the poppy there is a symbol for the gallant men who died in war. And because they did, you and I are free. That's why we wear a poppy, you see. I had a boy about your size, with golden hair and big blue eyes. He loved to play and jump and shout, free as a bird he would race about. As the years went by, he learned and grew, and became a man, as you will too. He was fine and strong, with a boyish smile, but he seemed with us such a little while. When war broke out and he went away, I still remember his face that day. When he smiled at me and said, goodbye, I'll be back soon, Mom, please don't cry. But the war went on and he had to stay, and all I could do was wait and pray. His letters told of the awful fight, I can still see it in my dreams at night. With the tanks and guns and cruel barbed wire, and the mines and bullets, the bombs and fire. Till at last, the war was won, and that's why we wear a poppy, son. The small boy turned as if to go, then said, thanks, lady, I'm glad to know. That sure did sound like an awful fight, but your son, did he come back all right? A tear rolled down each faded cheek. She shook her head, but didn't speak. I slunk away in a sort of shame, and if you were me, you'd have done the same. For our thanks, in giving, if oft delayed, though our freedom was bought, and thousands paid. And so, when we see a poppy worn, let us reflect on the burden borne by those who gave their very all when asked to answer their country's call. That we at home in peace might live, then wear a poppy, remember and give.
Thank you, Avery. At this time, we will have Alina de Kremer playing Last Post, which will be followed by 2 minutes of silence, lament, reveille, and the reading of the Act of Remembrance by Mr. Peter Stamatopoulos.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Thank you. We would now like to welcome the principal of Bev Facey Community High School, Mr. Paul Pallister.
Like parties, stand up, ease. Stand easy.
The 11th day of the 11th month. This is a Remembrance Day in Canada. On this date in 1918 at 11 a.m., World War I ended. We gather at memorials in cities, towns, and villages throughout our country. We stand with our heads bowed, and we wear a poppy. This ceremony is a time for respect, a time to listen with our ears, but also our hearts, for all people who sacrificed and contributed to make our world better. Welcome and thank you for being here during this time of showing respect at Bev Facey. Student, staff, dignitaries, guests, I appreciate the time you have given to be with us this morning. As Canada moves forward in properly acknowledging our shared history with First Nations peoples, I would like to say a few words about this as part of my call to action on truth and reconciliation. Close to 7,000 members of the Canadian forces of World War I and World War II were of Aboriginal descent. An astonishing number, given the limited civil rights accorded to Canada's First Peoples in the early 20th century. A quote from a First Nations veteran: "How proudly the flag waved overhead, the bands played, and the troops marched away from the reserves, the isolated villages, the city streets. We were Canadian Native soldiers, warriors in a proud tradition stretching back over thousands of years into the dim past. We traveled by ships, by plane, and mostly on foot. In a dozen places we went: France, Germany, Italy, Japan. We raised our flags, and we were buried in those foreign soils." First Nations troops encountered a double cultural barrier in the military: the racial prejudice that marked the contemporary non-Aboriginal world, and the military hierarchy that worked almost exclusively in English, a language many Aboriginal recruits did not speak. Records and memoirs suggest that most units eventually embraced First Peoples soldiers, even providing a more welcoming or progressive environment than other areas of contemporary society. First Nations troops left a remarkable record of wartime accomplishment. Many acquired near legendary status as scouts and snipers, drawing on pre-war hunting skills and wilderness experience. The most decorated, Corporal Francis Pegamagabau, an Ojibwe from Perry Island, Ontario, received a military medal for his bravery and effectiveness. A wonderful novel to read by Canadian author Joseph Boyden entitled 3-Day Road creates two characters loosely based on the war exploits of Pegamagabau. Many First Nations soldiers returned home from the war, hoping that their sacrifice and their achievements on the battlefield would lead to greater recognition and improved living conditions at home for them, their families, and their nations. The soldiers fought for a shared values of freedom and democratic rights for all. Federal policy, however, extended many post-war benefits to Aboriginal veterans, but not as many those accorded to non-Aboriginal veterans. Nor did the war herald a broader breakthrough in civil liberties for First Nations peoples. The policies of enfranchisement under the Indian Act meant that many returning soldiers had their identity as status Indians stolen from them. The act stated that any Indian who was absent from reserve for 4 years would lose their status. Upon returning home, many also learned that their reserve lands had been sold to non-natives, further encroaching on traditional territories. In the face of the hundreds of First Nation soldiers who gave their lives defending freedom and civil liberties, Canada continued forward with policies of residential schools, discrimination, assimilation, and oppression. Many Aboriginal veterans, including Francis Pegamagabao, became politically active in the protection of their communities and the advancement of First Nations rights. Finally, in 1995, 50 years after the end of World War II, Indigenous peoples were finally allowed to lay a wreath at the National War Memorial. A new poem written this year for Remembrance Day by Solomon Ratt references this reality. I'll read it to you. We were the forgotten of the lest we forget. We were the invisible ghosts from the res. We had no obligation to join. We had to give up our treaty status. We had fought. We died. Our language was used for secret messages. We stood side by side with other soldiers in our victory. We were cast aside when we came back home. We didn't get the benefits allotted other veterans. We didn't know where to live since we gave up our treaty status. We were the forgotten of the lest we forget. We were the invisible ghosts from the res. This year I challenge you to not forget. Do not forget the lives sacrificed by Native and non-Native soldiers. Do not forget the shared values that those soldiers carried into battle together. Do not forget the freedoms and liberties that were lost on Canadian soil by all First Nations people before, during, and after the wars. Together, nation to nation, we can move forward. Let us honor our collective sacrifices and losses and continue to build a better future. Last year at this time, I went to northern France during the Remembrance Week, saw the D-Day beaches, the memorials, the battle sites of the world wars. It was incredibly moving, enlightening, and difficult to imagine the sacrifice made by so many who were your age or a year or two older. Remembrance Day is a time we honor all who fought for our freedom, but it also provides each of us with the opportunity to reflect on how we would feel if our whole pattern of life was threatened, as it currently is in many countries of our world today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pallister. We will now have our wreath-laying ceremony. The laying of the wreaths symbolizes our thanks and remembrance of those who have sacrificed so much for our freedom.
Representing Elk Island Public Schools, we have School Board Chair Mrs. Trina Boymuk, accompanied by Paige Proskew. Representing the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we have Constable Tara Leeson, accompanied by Yana Banati. Representing the community of Sher Park, we have Deputy Mayor Mr. Dave Anderson, accompanied by Astrid Diebert. Representing the staff of Bev Facey Community High School, we have Mrs. Trudy Williamson, accompanied by Nicole Murray. Representing the student body of Bev Facey Community High School, we have Nadia Crush, accompanied by Nick Knoppers.
Thank you to all our wreath carriers. Please join Kat Brazel as she leads us in the singing of O Canada.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all thy sons command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land, glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you, Kat. We would now like everybody's attention directed towards the main screen while we play a video presentation commemorating the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge.
Right party, stand back.
The fog of 100 years hangs between now and the horrors of then. Tortured war memories, overgrown by time and undercut by the peace. Of the people, few memorials speak as eloquently as this of the monumental loss. Far away in Toronto, at St. Andrew's Church, there is one other memorial that speaks more intimately of the pain.
I find it interesting looking at the different numbers here. That
They, connected by blood to that war, gather for a special occasion, a chance to reach across time through a battlefield cross.
When the battle was over, many battalions put up almost identical, similar crosses. Unfortunately, there's a small handful of them who have survived. It's special because it commemorates individuals who were maybe unknown but were themselves special for what they did.
Canadian names on French wood, made right on the battlefield by an unknown carpenter from the 15th Battalion, and planted to mark a makeshift grave for soldiers killed in the first hours of the assault on Vimy Ridge. Each name tells a story. Orlando Wilcox, a diamond setter in life, was only 27, leaving behind a young wife and a daughter, a pistol and a twin. Wilcox was Richard Merritt's great uncle.
we have a wonderful portrait of he and his twin brother, who also was in the war. He came back to Canada, and he lived to be 96. So, you know, twins often live to be the same length of time. So if Orlando hadn't been killed at Vimy, he may well have lived to be a very old man.
There was also John Owens, misspelled on the cross with an extra E. Born in Ireland, worked as an electrician on the Titanic before immigrating to Canada. He was Joe McLaughlin's great uncle.
My grandmother had mentioned that she had lost a brother at Vimy Ridge, and that was all that was said. And that was typical of families back then concerning what happened in the war.
Edwin Keene was a bricklayer, older than most recruits. At 45, he left behind 4 young children. So no memories were passed on of the man who was Scott Keene's great-grandfather.
So I'm basically flying blind, trying to find out all the information I can.
Over 5 years of searching, he's found documents about his signing up and how he died, how often he was paid, and where he lived, and yet no medals and no photos.
He's a ghost. I mean, there's only so much that you can see. A lot of the stuff is repetitive. You know, I know his number now, his personnel number off by heart, which I never knew before, just because I keep on seeing it all the paperwork. I mean, 799423. And which is, I mean, I can't remember my childhood phone number, but I can remember that now, so.
And it's become important to reach across time to connect his children.
I think he's become the sort of focus for me because, yeah, I want to know where I came from. I wanted to be able to pass something on to my kids.
What they all had in common was when they died, April 9th. The start of a battle that ultimately cost nearly 3,600 Canadian lives. After the war, the cross was somehow brought over and into the 48th Highlanders Museum.
You have relatives?
To mark 100 years since Vimy, experts packed it for the voyage back.
29 on this side.
It was retired Brigadier General Greg Young's idea.
Commission, or what they call commission tags. It becomes, it's a character in a story that's being told. So you tend to look at it almost as a character rather than a piece of 2x4. It kind of come to life again.
And so, like many a reluctant veteran, it was bound for the old battlefield. It is a long way back, through such vast stretches of history, through to fields of memories that looked nothing like this. A pilgrimage to a place whose sole purpose now is to reach across time and to remember.
This is excellent.
Even for those who know Vimy Ridge and its relics, like Simon Godley and Joanne Gagné, this is an exhilarating moment.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Absolutely beautiful. Oh wow.
That's fantastic. It's in great shape.
I mean, there's a poppy, I've been told, for every name on the cross. So, choisissez un chacun pour vous.
Merci beaucoup.
Joanne Gagné from Veterans Affairs had long dreamt of bringing a battlefield cross back to Vimy and worked from this end to make it happen.
I was touched and I was very emotional, and I did have the goosebump and felt that maybe the soldiers would appreciate, like, you know, this special connection or the extra mile we went to get it back here. And I really appreciate the museum for lending us the cross for this very special year.
The full bombardment started up.
Simon Godley says he's a seriously enthusiastic amateur historian here. He painstakingly pinpointed the cross's original location with old maps and war diaries.
That's actually what the difference between these sort of crosses and the likes of the memorial. The memorial is a fabulous structure, but it took years to conceive and just get right. The carpenter here wasn't necessarily worrying about whether he got his circle just absolutely. It was a labor of love to just do it there and honor the fallen. And I think that's sort of, it's way more personal and immediate.
Out here, it becomes clear why April 9th had claimed so many lives. That over there in the distance you can see is Vimy Ridge. Now the 15th Battalion had to take the eastern end of it, and so they started over here. Their headquarters was actually just underneath us here. So that meant, though, that they had to travel further and through many more German lines. That meant heavy casualties. Most were cut down by machine gun and small arms fire, as Edwin Keane did, killed immediately by a bullet between 5:15 and 5:30 a.m. He was buried here with the others who fell that day, all their names etched on that cross.
This is where it belongs, in that field there. That's where it really belongs.
Ok. Je vais mettre mes pieds dans la caisse. Ok.
If we forget these people, they will just die a second time. They're already dead here, but if we forget them altogether and we just say, oh, well, you know, let's move on here. These people, yeah, they would just sort of die again and they just get effaced from history.
One of the few remaining witnesses to the toll, the price Canadians paid here is back home, on a lonely ceremony to make history again. There is one more stop before the cross is put on display. Those soldiers had eventually been moved from their battlefield grave to this cemetery. The cross was also brought here then, standing guard as the soldiers slept, now finally reunited with the men whose names it has carried for 100 years.
You know, sometimes I want to think that it's a pure coincidence, but I think like it cannot be just a coincidence. And it's just me. I don't think it's me. It's as if like, I don't know, to me it's like that story is so powerful. It's as if this cross wanted to come back home. That's how I saw it.
And now it's home.
And now it's home.
They were young sons to a young nation that had not yet known conflict on such a blinding scale. A conflict whose memory is so far now, it has waned.
So, afterwards, they carved the names on the cross.
But not for Scott Keane. With stubborn research, he's slowly assembling a picture of his great-grandfather's life, and now a clear picture of where he died.
It's quite amazing to see that it's just a field now, and that there's life goes on, I guess. But the fact that it was there is just again, not a lot of words you can put together at the moment for that. Very, very humbling to think that this was that they put it back in the same spot that it was raised. It's really, it leaves you without words. And I mean, to have my kids stand in front of it, there's family history here now. Because my family has not had a lot of verbal history given to us, I want to be able to write something down. I want to be able to, even if it's just my own recollection of what I've learned, just so that generations from now somebody has something to say, you know what, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was at Vimy Ridge.
A memory passed on, a living record of horrifying conflict, of a magnitude still hard to imagine. Nala Ayed, CBC News, Vimy, France.